Benelli is a brand that's synonymous with high-quality semi-auto shotguns. But did you know they make a pump action? In fact, that pump action is now in its third generation. The Benelli Nova 3 is here, and Benelli was kind enough to send it for test and review. Benelli's take on a pump shotgun was always bound to be different. If you know anything about Benelli, they do some odd stuff, from a caseless 9mm submachine gun to an inertia-driven handgun. Whenever they get outside their box of semi-auto shotguns, things just get weird. Now, everyone these days makes a pump-action shotgun, so how exactly could Benelli stand out? So they took the pump-action design and infused it with a healthy amount of polymer. The original Nova, the Supernova, and the Nova 3 are essentially metal skeletons encased in polymer, which is kind of interesting because in watching some videos of the Benelli Nova 3's coverage, people were really complaining about the use of polymer, as if Glock hasn't existed for 40-something years. And as if Benelli hasn't been using polymer in the Nova series for over 2 decades now. Polymer keeps the price low, and Benelli doesn't make cheap stuff, so if they can make an affordable pump action, it's pretty good to go. Additionally, it also keeps the weapon's weight low. So this is a 12-gauge shotgun with a 7-shot magazine tube, and it weighs only 5.9 pounds. The Nova 3 might be the lightest 12-gauge tactical pump-action shotgun on the market. So like its predecessors, the Nova 3 does occupy, defensive, tactical, and hunting shotguns. Today's is the tactical variant, specifically the decked-out tactical variant, with the full-length 7-round magazine tube and a 922R compliant design. This means it has enough American parts that we're not stuck with a 5-round tube. As far as I know, this is the first in the Nova series to come to the United States in a 922R compliant form, and it even has a multicam black finish, which, well, isn't really a useful camouflage. It sure as hell looks cool. So let's talk about what's new with the Nova 3 and go over some of the weapon's features. The gun is optics ready. The old Benellis were too, but this one actually comes with a rail pre-installed. I have replaced that with the Vortex Viper shotgun red dot, which is a great red dot, and we'll be getting its own review. Besides being optics ready, it comes with a set of adjustable ghost ring iron sights, which are quite nice, and they do co-witness with the Vortex Viper. So the pump also comes with 6 M-LOK slots, so you can mount accessories. Most importantly, a flashlight if you're going to be using this for any kind of home defense or tactical use. The pump also has the magazine disconnect button, which is kind of famous on the Nova series. If you press this button, then work the action, a round will not be ejected from the magazine. So this allows you to clear the chamber very easily, or directly load the chamber, or do something like a slug select drill. The Nova and Supernova used a rotating bolt, and so does the Nova 3, but there is a difference. It now uses the same bolt head they use on the M4 semi-auto shotgun, which is supposed to improve dependability. Now the rotating action's already pretty great because that allows a different level of force to be imparted when you work the pump. So instead of just going straight rearward, now we're getting a rotational force that really helps ensure that rounds are going to clear the chamber when you work the action. One of the most notable changes from the Supernova and Nova to the Nova 3 is ditching the ability to shoot 3.5-inch shells. This gun only has a 3-inch chamber, and I don't really think that's a problem. If you were, bird hunting, you probably use 3.5-inch shells. But honestly, all the bird hunters I know that are using 3.5-inch shells are using semi-auto shotguns. So I don't really think a lot of people were using the Nova series with that, those long rounds. Now, the benefit, according to Benelli, is that this leads to a 14% shorter cycling stroke compared to the Nova, which would make it faster and also probably helps prevent short strokes. Now, what I did like about the 3.5-inch chamber on the Supernova was that the loading port and the ejection port were designed for those longer shells, and this meant they were bigger, and things that are bigger are easier to load with things that are smaller. So if I'm shoving 2 3/4-inch shells into the gun, it's a little bit easier because the loading port's so much bigger. Now with that said, the Nova 3 did kind of take that into account and uses a beveled loading port. Now essentially they trimmed the corners, rounded them off, so you do have this nice wide loading port that makes it easy to throw shells into the gun. It also allows for doubles and I guess quads. I can barely do doubles, and you'll see me kind of awkwardly fumble through them throughout this video, but it is possible, and the gun comes pre-cut for that. So that's kind of a nice feature, and I never really found myself missing the 3.5-inch chamber for any particular reason, especially in a tactical shotgun. It also seems like Benelli ditched that chevron foam recoil reducing stock you found on the Supernova. I guess because you're not using 3.5-inch rounds, it's not needed, but it was kind of interesting, and there's some other problems with the stock I'll talk about later. So let's talk a little bit about ergonomics and the one long problem the Benelli Nova 3 has. I don't want to be the type to wait too long to talk about the thing I'm advertising in the thumbnail, so let's get down to it. The stock on this thing is too damn long. The length of pull is 14 and 1/8 inches, which is just, that's bird gun length on a tactical shotgun, and it makes no sense. I don't understand how Benelli has been completely oblivious to the modern shotgun, the modern fighting shotgun, and the ability to control length of pull. Almost every modern shotgun you're seeing come out, especially tactical shotguns, use a system of spacers to allow you to adjust the length of pull. You remember stocks like the Magpul SGA kind of made this a famous feature, and it's a great feature. People want it because people are all different sizes. Even if it didn't have an adjustable length of pull, but just maybe a fixed one that was actually a reasonable length, this would be a much better shotgun. This is going to be a gun that's not going to be easy to use for shorter people, not in a kind of tactical squared up stance, and I just don't understand why Benelli made that decision. So you might say, hey, just switch it. I googled it. Mesa Tactical makes an Urbino stock that has a shorter length of pull. Actually, I have one for my Supernova, and it's great. Unfortunately, the stock and the receiver are one part. You cannot separate the stock to change it out. So there's no way to adjust this stock's length of pull without sending it to someone who will trim it properly, which is a little bit tougher of a task than you think, and it's definitely going to void your warranty. So that's my problem with the Benelli Nova 3. It's my only real problem with the gun. And let's get on to the rest of the ergonomics. So the stock saddens me because the rest of the gun is so ergonomic. First and foremost, look at that pump. Do you see how long it is? There is so much space to grab onto that thing. If you have short arms or long arms, you can just grab that pump and work it. It's perfect. It's really fantastic, and I really, really love that Benelli did that. And I don't think of any other shotgun that does that. The only real problem some might have is that the pump will actually overlap with the receiver, which makes placing like a side saddle a little more difficult. This is why you kind of got to go with like an elastic side saddle to the rearmost portion of the shotgun, but that could fit 8 rounds in this gun. I'm not really that concerned about reloading. The safety and pump release are also massive. They're very easy to press, very easy to reach with your trigger finger without having to break your firing grip or feel around awkwardly trying to find them. The actual pump action is incredibly smooth and very light. There's a little bit of like the rotating bolt kind of helps unlock it. If you've ever shot a Winchester 1300, those used to be called like the speed shotgun or something like that, it's speed pump, because it does kind of instinctively make the bolt unlock and shoot back, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch, which gives you the ability to pump the shotgun very rapidly. And when paired with a smooth pump action and a huge pump, it's a really, really fast cycling shotgun, fast enough to get 2 shots off in under a second, cold. Like I didn't really even have to practice to get that down. So if I could put 18 rounds of buckshot onto one target in less than a second, I'm doing pretty damn good in a gunfight. Benelli also seemed to make a few changes to the pump from the Supernova. Namely, my fingers don't get pinched when it overlaps with the receiver like it used to with the Supernova. That was never a major problem, but I noticed today while I was shooting this thing that it wasn't a problem anymore at all with the Nova 3. Now, a universal rule of 12 gauge shotguns is that they are always one of the rougher recoiling shoulder mounted firearms. Another rule to remember is that the less a gun weighs, the more recoil you feel. Physics are kind of rude that way. So the 5.9 pound nature of the Nova 3 could make it a harsh recoiling gun. As a resident shotgun nerd, I'll confirm something like an 8 pound 590A1 has less felt recoil than the Nova 3. That doesn't mean the Nova 3 can't be controlled. It just takes a little effort and proper recoil mitigation technique, but it can be done. So again, as I mentioned, I was able to fire 2 full powered rounds of 2 3/4 inch buckshot on target in less than a second at 10 yards. So that takes a good degree of control. And one of the reasons I can do this is because I'm 6'5", so the stock is fine for me, but it's going to be a pain for most shooters to be able to do that. Now, if you don't employ those proper recoil mitigation techniques, the gun can be jarring in terms of recoil. I tried it. I tried just, the normal hold it up and fire, and man, it can smack the hell out of you if you're not paying attention. So make sure you're engaging that push-pull to get a good control over the gun. Now, before I put the red dot on it, I did just shoot it with the iron sights to get an idea of how it came from the factory. The rear peep sight is actually very, very large, and the front sight with the white dot is visible enough that you can get behind the gun very quickly and get on target very quickly. So these are pretty good ghost ring sights. I would replace them with a red dot for defensive use because the red dot is so much better. And I did notice like a noticeable decrease in speed, or I guess an increase in my speed, but a decrease on the shot timer when I added the red dot. With those ghost rings, I fired some slugs at 50 and 75 yards. I had no problem hitting the target. I did notice I had to aim kind of at the, I guess I would say the belly button, and I would hit maybe 3 inches above that into like that chest zone, or maybe not the belly button, but I'd have to aim a little low at 50 yards, but they were dead on at 75 yards. Now, oddly, the various Benelli Nova 3s have different chokes. So they have both fixed and you can use a Benelli choke system. Mine has I can change the choke, but it comes with a modified, which is odd. And there are some of the Benelli tactical ones that come with a fixed modified. That's even more odd to me. So it's not really a problem. You can swap the choke out pretty easy in my gun. But if you have a fixed modified, things like federal flight control are not going to work well in it. It's not designed for that modified choke. And what it typically will do is actually make the load spread more because it disengages the wad prematurely. Now in my gun with the modified choke, I fired a lot of cheap buckshot through it, and it patterned at 7 yards tight enough that it would stay inside of an IPSC-sized A zone. So that's tight enough. That's good performance, and the modified choke will help you with those cheaper loads. I would still swap it for a cylinder bore and use federal flight control, but that's just me. The gun can be reloaded very quickly, and you've got to keep a shotgun loaded to keep it running because of the relatively limited capacity compared to other weapons. Now there are a few things going for it that help with that. Namely the shotgun stock, its built-in pistol grip is kind of like the Magpul SGA grip, where it's very aggressive, and that makes it easier to hold the gun up, so it doesn't tend to dip when I have to break my support hand to grab those spare rounds from my belt. And the other thing that helps is we mentioned that the mag port's beveled, which makes it easy to shove rounds in various ways. Tactical or gamer reloads are both applicable with this gun. You don't have any problem doing either. Running port reloads is also very easy. Now when you get a red dot on the top, it might make more sense to go under. I've trained myself so much to go over because I often use a semi-auto shotgun, and I find that's the easier way with semi-autos. But really, I should practice going under with my pumps. Either way, I was able to rapidly reload this gun and get it back into the fight whenever I needed to, without any big difficulties. Again, you can watch me awkwardly fumble through trying to learn to load doubles. But I guess the only way, we learn anything is to awkwardly fumble through it a few times. Now, in terms of reliability, the gun ate everything. It cycled all of the 2.75-inch loads I ran through it. I didn't mess around with mini shells because they're a waste of time and money, and I don't see a purpose for them for a serious shotgun. So you can ask in the comments, but the answer is I just didn't shoot them. So again, fired slugs, buckshot, birdshot, and a mixture of different birdshots and buckshots, and they all ran fine. There was no problems in terms of operation. What I did have was a really interesting issue on my first range trip, where one of the trigger pins began to walk itself out of the gun. So this was enough that I could feel it if I ran my hand over the receiver, which meant, hey, let's stop and evaluate that. So I grabbed a punch and I pushed it back in. Then I started shooting, and after about 60 more rounds of full-powered buckshot, it did it again. So I grabbed the punch and I pushed it back in. Now it's never coming out more than a bit, but I think that's notable. But then after that, it never happened again. So that was just all buckshot. So I fired a day of nothing but birdshot. Didn't happen. So I was like, well, let's try buckshot again. And I fired another 100 rounds of buckshot and it never moved. All I could think is that the part may have come loose or was never installed properly until I pushed it back in there the second time. It's a weird problem and it hasn't repeated itself. That was, again, first range session, probably 100 rounds of buckshot that day. Since then, it's ate an entire case of birdshot, which is 250, and then another 100 rounds of buckshot today, and either 20 or 25 slugs, I can't remember. So whatever the problem was, it seemed to have stopped. So overall, the Nova 3 is not going to break your bank. It's not going to max out your credit card. The MSRP on this one's like in the mid or high 700s. But it seems to retail for around $500 for the high-end models, and they're going to get cheaper for the more basic models. It seems like this multicam black 922R compliant is the one that's really hitting the streets right now, but I imagine the more basic models are going to trip a few hundred dollars off that price. Ultimately, I think the Nova 3 is like a B- or a C+ shotgun, and that's solely because of that long stock. If the stock wasn't long, even if I could swap it, if I could just swap the stock for something with a shorter length of pull, this would probably be the best pump action shotgun currently on the market. It would be the most modern. It has a ton of features I love. It would almost be breaking the mold of the pump action shotgun, but damn, they are just sticking with that 14 1/8 inch length of pull. So I guess I'm a little too passionate about this subject. overall, I do think it's a great gun. I think they need to trim that stock. I'll stop talking about it now. But this gun could be a really serious competitor in the tactical shotgun market, the tactical pump action market. Hopefully, Benelli will learn their lesson and they'll do that. And what I would really, really love to see is them put some weight behind this gun. A lot of times the Nova and Supernova were just ignored. And I think the Nova 3 has real potential to make Benelli a serious contender in the pump action shotgun market. So, Benelli, put your ass behind it. Trim the stock on later editions. I'll buy a Gen 3.5 if it has a slightly trimmer stock, and I think a lot of people will. So that's all I have to say about the gun. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask below, excuse me. And thanks for watching. I hope everyone has a great day, and yeah, bye.